I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 8, Sunday, October 20th, 2024. The lesson is entitled Jesus Points to Daniel. Lesson text comes from Mark chapter 13, verses 14 through 27. Related scriptures are Daniel 12, 5 through 13, Joel 2, 1 through 17, Matthew 24, 15 through 31, Luke 21, 20 through 28. The place is Jerusalem. The time is 30 AD. Many people have heard that Jesus is coming again, but not too many seem concerned about preparing for that wonderful event. The Bible leaves no doubt about some of the signs that will come before he shows up. So we are without excuse if we are not prepared. Our lesson this week prepares us to be ready for Christ's return. Today's aim, facts, to show some of the signs that will precede the second coming of our Lord Jesus. Principle, to know that when Jesus is coming with power and great glory. Application, to realize that since the Bible teaches us that Jesus is coming soon in glory, we must do all we can to be ready. Illustrating the lesson. When Jesus comes in power and glory, we must be ready to receive him. Practical points. 1. God's people are not exempt from suffering and tribulation. Mark 13, 14 through 16, 2 Timothy 3, 12. 2. A time of great tribulation is coming to the earth. Mark 13, 17 through 19. 3. God's grace toward his children is evident even in the midst of tribulation, verse 20. 4. Beware. False Christs are even now trying to deter us from following the real Christ. Mark 13, 21 through 23, 1 John 2, 18. 5. We can be confident that Jesus is coming again to reign in power and glory. Mark 13, 24 through 26. 6. When Jesus comes again, he will finally unite all his children from all the ages. Verse 27. Golden text. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great glory and power. Mark 13, 26. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is the great abomination, Mark 13, 14. The second is great affliction, Mark 13, 15 through 23. And the third is great appearance, Mark 13, 24 through 27. Introduction. It has been said that the theme of the Old Testament is that Christ is coming. The theme of the 4 Gospels is that Christ has come, and the theme of the rest of the New Testament is that Christ is coming again. There is some truth in this approach. Discussion concerning the second coming often provokes significant debate among those who believe the Bible to be God's word. Sadly, more fire than light is often generated. Those who accept the divine origin of the scriptures do not always agree about the details of end times events. Since these things have not yet occurred, we must be cautious about being too dogmatic concerning our preferred understanding of the last days. 2 extremes must be avoided. First, we should not entirely avoid study of the last things or astrology because of the controversial nature and the uncertainty of the topic. Second, we should be careful not to develop tunnel vision regarding prophecy and fail to study anything else, thus avoiding the serious study of other important Bible doctrines. Great abomination, Mark 13, 14. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Mark 13, with parallels in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, is called the Olivet Discourse because Jesus spoke about Jerusalem's destruction as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, Mark 13:3. Christ arrived in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday amid the shouts of enthusiastic pilgrims. 11:1 through 11. At the end of the day, he retired to Bethany. The next day, Monday, the Lord returned to the city, chasing money changers from the temple and departing again at the end of the day. Verse 19. On Tuesday, he returned to Jerusalem once again. Verse 20. The religious leaders took this opportunity to question Christ about his authority, verses 27 through 33, paying taxes to Caesar, 12:13 through 17, marriage in the afterlife, verses 18 through 27, and the greatest commandment, verses 28 through 34. Each of these attempts were silenced by Jesus' answers. Before leaving the temple courts, Christ delivered a scathing denunciation of the hypocritical Pharisees, Matthew 23. As Jesus and his disciples departed, the disciples marveled at the grandeur and beauty of the temple. The Lord then dropped something of a bombshell. Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Mark 13:2. In response, Jesus' closest disciples asked him when these things would take place, verse 4. Jesus began by telling them that false Christ would arrive, verse 6. Wars and rumors of wars would occur, verse 7, and earthquakes and famine would be frequent. These signs, however, were just the beginning of sorrows, verse 8. There would also be intense persecution of the faithful, verse 9. We now come to one of the most significant signs mentioned in this discourse, the abomination of desolation, verse 14. Not only is it significant, it has also been the subject of seemingly endless debate. The chief question that affects how we understand Mark 13 is whether Christ was primarily talking about the Jerusalem of his day, the Jerusalem of the end times, or both. While some Bible scholars lean one way or the other, others think that Jesus was dealing with both the Jerusalem that would be destroyed in AD 70 and a rebuilt Jerusalem after that time, perhaps including an end-time temple. Henry Haley wrote, "It seems plain that he had in mind two distinct events separated by an interval of time. One looking at two distant mountain peaks, one behind the other. They seem close together, though they may be far apart. So is Jesus' perspective. These two events, one in some respects typical of the other, stood in close proximity, though there is a long interval between. Since Daniel speaks of the abomination of desolation, 18:13, 9:27, 11:31, 12:11, Christ was not delivering new revelation to his disciples, but interpreting what had already been foretold. Some believe this refers to events that will occur during the Great Tribulation. Some suggest Daniel's prophecy referring primarily to what occurred during the Maccabean period when the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes ruled 175 through 164 BC, desecrated the temple by erecting an image of Zeus and sacrificing swine on the altar. However, since Christ spoke of the abomination of desolation as something future, Mark 13:14, it could not have been its only meaning in a past event. Christ understood the abomination of desolation to be a person, most likely the same as Paul's man of sin, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worship, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 through 4. This person is the Antichrist. He will make a covenant with the Jewish people at the beginning of the 7-year period preceding Christ's second coming. Great affliction, verse 15. And let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house. Verse 16. And let him that is in the field not turn back again for to take up his garment. Verse 17. But woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. Verse 18. And pray ye that your flight be not in the winter. Verse 19. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be. Verse 20. And except that the Lord have shortened those days, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake whom he have chosen, he have shortened the days. Verse 21. And then if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, or Lo, he is there, believe him not. Verse 22. For false Christ and false prophets shall rise, and shall show signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect. Verse 23. But take ye heed, behold, I have foretold you all things. Future conditions, Mark 13, 15 through 18. From what the Jewish historian Josephus related concerning the razing of Jerusalem in AD 70, we know that it was horrific for those caught in the city after the Roman assaults began. Once the people saw Jerusalem compassed with armies, they would know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Luke 21:20. Consequently, there would be no time to take anything out of their homes. Mark 13:15. Such a time would be especially difficult for nursing mothers or during winter. It is difficult to determine whether Christ was dealing primarily with events that would occur during the lifetime of his disciples or with end-time events. He seems to have been referring at least partly to the destruction of Jerusalem that occurred in AD 70, which included the destruction of the temple and caused many Jews and Christians to flee the city. The historical records we have on those events depict a horrifying scene that matches the warnings Jesus gives here. Conflict, Mark 13, 19 through 20. If Christ had been referring only to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, however, those events would have been the worst that the world has ever seen. There appears to be a further fulfillment that is yet to come. Jesus' words have an ominous end times ring. Since these last days would be so catastrophic, the Lord would shorten them. Otherwise, no one would be saved. Verse 20. Likely a reference to physical survival, not salvation from sin. For the elect's sake, that is, for those who are redeemed, God has shortened those days. Verse 20. Of this time, God sets limits on the duration of the end time tribulation. While all this proved true indirectly in AD 70, the language of this verse suggests God's direct intervention in judgment, an unmistakable characteristic of the end time tribulation. False Christ. Mark 13:21 through 23. False Christs and prophets have arisen since the time of Christ and will continue to do so until the end. Christians are to be on guard against deceivers and not believe those who proclaim that they have found the Christ or received some new revelation from God. Galatians 1:8 through 9. As church history shows us, many have deceived and have been deceived in exactly the way Jesus described in Mark 13. The same kind of deception continues today. Therefore, we must pay attention to the many warnings given throughout scriptures concerning false teachers. These scriptures counterfeit, claim miraculous powers. If they show signs and wonders, verse 22, it is either mere trickery or done by the power of Satan. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:13 through 14. That a person can perform miraculous signs does not necessarily mean he is a true child of God. Matthew 7:21 through 23. False teachers, whether ancient or modern, have one goal: to deceive God's people, the elect. Mark 13:22. Since Satan has already deceived unbelievers, they are not his primary targets. Jesus' words, if it were possible, verse 22, seems to be an optimistic indicator that true believers will not be deceived, although Paul suggests otherwise in 2 Thessalonians 2:1 through 2. As they say, forewarned is forearmed. Jesus' declaration would serve as a reminder to early disciples and modern believers. Mark closes with another exhortation to remain alert and on guard. We must do our own part to resist the temptations of the false prophets. In short, we must not assume that because we are among the elect, we have no role to play in protecting ourselves and our churches against religious charlatans. False teachers often claim special insight about the end times. We should listen cautiously to those who claim knowledge about prophetic themes that they say that they say have been kept hidden until they wrote a book on it. Great appearance, verse 24. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. Verse 25. And the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. Verse 26. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Verse 27. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. Sun darkened, Mark 13:24 through 25. While tribulation can refer to anything of testing or affliction in general, these verses speak of the great tribulation which will precede Jesus' return. The Greek word rendered tribulation in verse 24 is also used in verse 19. Daniel 12:1 says, "There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." Jeremiah 37, Revelation 7:14. After that tribulation indicates that Jesus' coming would follow this time of trouble, Mark 13:24. If these verses apply exclusively to the events of AD 70, then Jesus Christ should have returned shortly thereafter. That he did not return then supports the view that verses 14 through 23 refer to both the destruction of Jerusalem and the future great tribulation before Christ will return. Prior to the return of Christ, calamity events will occur in the heavens. How these events will be interpreted by the people who see them is not stated here. Revelation 6:12 through 17. While such events might cause some to think the end is near, Matthew's account indicates that many will go about their daily business as in Noah's days. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24:38 through 39. As to stars falling and heavenly powers being shaken, Mark 13:25. This may refer to a physical forces controlling the movements of the celestial bodies, which will be thrown out of their normal course. Or B, spiritual forces of evil, Satan and his cohorts, who will be greatly disturbed by these events. Sun descending, Mark 13:26 through 27. After all these events have occurred, then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Mark 13:26. Or as Revelations 1:7 says, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Christ's coming in power and glory is vividly described in Revelation 19. In spite of the fact that the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies will gather together to make war against Christ and against his army, verse 19, they will be decisively defeated by the King of Kings. Then the beast and the false prophet will be cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone, verse 20. Angels will gather the elect together from the uttermost part of the earth, Mark 13:27, thus fulfilling one of Jesus' parables in which wheat and tares grow together until the harvest, Matthew 13:24 through 30, 36 through 43. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. Verse 40. We dare not wait until the end of time to try to get ready to meet God. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. 2 Corinthians 6:2. As Christ finished his discourse, he told his disciples three things. First, just as the leaves of a fig tree indicate summer is near, so these signs indicate the nearness of Jesus' return. Mark 13:28 through 30. Second, this generation will not pass away until these things began to take place. Indeed, Jerusalem was destroyed in his listeners' lifetimes. Third, since no one knows the precise time of Christ's coming, we must be ready for that day. Mark 13:32 through 37. Questions. 1. Why is this section of Scripture called the Olivet Discourse? 2. Where do we first read of the abomination of desolation in the Bible? 3. What are some possible meanings of the abomination of desolation? 4. Does Mark 13 relate to events of the apostolic age or to the end of the age? Explain. 5. Why could some of the prophecies of Mark 13 not relate to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70? 6. Why would the Lord shorten the days of tribulation? 7. Who are the elect? 8. Do you think the signs and wonders of false prophets are real or fake? Why? 9. Why are warnings about false teachers always relevant? 10. When Christ returns, who will see him? What events will occur? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, October 20th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.